I just watched Doctor Sleep. I didn't actually just watch it, that's just kind of become my intro. I watched it last night because you gotta watch horror movies at night. But I don't know if I really needed to be honest. I probably could have watched this in the day. It's kind of not really a horror. Well, I'll get on to that. Basically, for anyone who doesn't know, it's the sequel to The Shining, except it only came out in 2018, so 38 years after the original film, and 22 years after Stanley Kubrick, the original director, died. So the book this is based on came out in 2013, so he wouldn't have even known there was ever a sequel to it. Um, the plot is basically it's a bit more like Blade Runner 2049 as a sequel. Like it's so much time has passed that it's kind of a different story set in the same universe. It's not kind of just the same thing again. It's Danny, the little boy from The Shining, is now a fully grown man played by Ewan McGregor, and he still has a shining ability, but he's trying to not to use it because obviously he's had bad experience with it. He chats to the ghost of Dick Halloran, but that's pretty much it. He comes in contact with a 13-year-old girl who has shining ability too, and they end up finding out there's some people who are trying to steal kids' shining ability to give themselves a longer life. And so it's not really supernatural in the same way. Like the antagonists are people, and yeah, they just basically team up and try and stop the baddies. It's very, very different to The Shining. So I thought this would. So right, I watched The Shining for the first time 2 nights ago, and I thought it was absolutely brilliant. I thought it wouldn't get to me. I thought it would just kind of be that. I only really watched it because it's a classic. I thought like, yeah, I ought to have seen it. So I gave it a watch, and I thought, I know everything about it. I know every like all the visuals are so iconic. It won't work as a horror film, but I can appreciate it as a bit of film history. And it really did get to me as a horror film. I watched it in the middle of the night, and I thought it was really scary. I don't know. I feel like horror films normally don't do much for me, and especially old ones like never get me in the slightest. But it definitely did. Even though I knew what was coming, I thought it was very, very scary, and it was just a really great film. I thought that although Stephen King, who wrote the book it's based on, hates the film because it's such a departure from the book, I thought the departures were what made it work. I thought the fact that it's all open to interpretation, it doesn't really answer questions. It just throws things out there. It's quite surrealist in that way. Like it's like what David Lynch would do. Like he throws out loads of ideas, and it does all have meaning. It does all make sense. But it's for you to puzzle it together. It's kind of I love that. It's you get see. I think why it's better than David Lynch's. Most David Lynch's films, if you get nothing from them apart from just being a mystery. Like Eraserhead, I know everyone loves it. I personally just think it's just a challenge. It's not a film. It's The Shining. You get scared out of it, and you get invested in the characters, and there's a story anyway, even if you don't know everything, but. So it's a mystery and it's a film in its own right, and I think that's the best for things like this. Growing up, I was a big fan of Don't Hug Me, I'm Scared. Remember them on YouTube? It's like kind of like a kids show, but it gets all like messed up and dark. See, they were entertaining, just as like it's like Sesame Street, but it just goes all like gory and everything and violent and weird. So they were entertaining that way, but then it was also a social commentary, and there was like lots of surrealist symbolism and stuff, and so that works on another level. And I think you need to do that for something like this, and that's why I personally don't connect to David Lynch films as much. Like I like Mulholland Drive, but it feels like an exam question. It feels like I need to watch Mulholland Drive and then do a 15-mark question answering it, or like I need to write a dissertation on it. Like it just feels like work. It doesn't feel like a film. It just feels like work. So I think why Shining was so great is because there's so much to interpret from it, and it feels like so. Stanley Kubrick didn't set out to make an adaptation of The Shining. He wanted to make a horror film, so he read loads of horror books to see which one he wanted to adapt, and then he chose The Shining to have the most potential to make what he wanted to make. But him wanting to make just his own horror film came before wanting to make specifically The Shining, so that's why it's not that faithful, because he had his own ideas anyway, and he wanted to do his own thing. He wanted to make a film that was Kubrick like, it was open to interpretation, much like 2001 is. And so, whereas The Shining book is very literal, it's ghosts. It's about alcoholism, and it's about family relationships, and it's everything that happens is literal. There's nothing is a metaphor, nothing is meant to be allegory, whatever. And so the differences between the movies of Doctor Sleep and The Shining are, this is made with Stephen King's kind of blessing. Like he wanted it done his way, and it kind of retcons The Shining to be Stephen King's original vision a lot closer anyway, in its literalness. So this film isn't open to interpretation at all. It's just it is what it is. It's exactly its own thing. And so I liked the film. I thought it was pretty entertaining, but I just love the theories of The Shining. There's a documentary called Room 237, which I watched straight after watching The Shining. It was really late at night. I watched that, and it was it's basically just a bunch of like talking heads talking about all the different theories, all for the true hidden meaning. And there's stuff like about it being about the Holocaust, which I don't really buy. I see where they're coming from with their like evidence, but I don't really buy it. And there's one about how it's meant to be about Stanley Kubrick confessing to faking the moon landing, and that one is just so clearly nonsense. I mean, if anyone listening to this thinks the moon landing was fake, Corridor Crew did a really great video on it, like on April Fool's Day, so like 2 weeks ago, because they do a series called VFX Artists React to Bad and Great CGI. And so they did an April Fool's video on the moon landing. So you're like, oh my god, they're breaking down why the moon landing's fake. But it turns out they're just telling us why it's absolutely impossible to have faked it. And it's really interesting. And that goes into detail about Kubrick stuff and how 2001 is like, the technology is so different. And in short, direction of the light, impossible to fake in a studio. The dust not pluming, impossible to replicate unless it's in zero gravity. But anyway, yeah, that theory was nonsense. And there's also, I don't know, most of them though, I thought in that documentary Room 237 were really compelling. There was the ones about Jack sexually abusing Danny. I thought I completely bought. I thought they were made complete sense, and they were really well done. And that one's more about film being a lot of metaphor and a lot of allegory rather than all being literal. And if that's the case, well, I mean, you could either you could probably have it either with or without the ghosts also being real, the supernatural element. And there's also I completely buy. There's one about Native American genocide. It's kind of, that's what's inspiring the film, and that's set up so much. I buy that. But the fact that there are so many different ways of interpreting it is what makes this film so great. And so, Doctor Sleep, yes, it works as a sequel to the novel, but it's just, and I really respect how it's his own thing. If Mike Flanagan just tried to imitate Kubrick, it wouldn't have worked. But he does imitate some elements, but it negatively retcons the original film, and Kubrick would have hated it. He would have hated this film for sure, because it just undoes all the mystery. It makes everything exactly, it answers the questions which it should never answer. See, whereas The Shining didn't remind me of anything. I mean, I watched it, it's like, it's unlike anything I've seen. Like, it's a horror film in broad daylight. I mean, since, I guess, like Midsummer and stuff has been in broad daylight, but just in general, I mean, yes, there's people killing their families, but it's I don't know, in serial killer films and slashers, but it didn't really feel much like them to me particularly. There's a bit of scream in there, but I mean, these films are all after. But no, Doctor Sleep reminded me of just constantly, every single thing reminded me of 10 other things. I made a little bit of a list of things it reminded me of, because it was just ridiculous. I mean, the biggest thing I thought was The Haunting of Hill House. Now, that was a TV show which was adapted by Mike Flanagan, the same director as did this. But even the book it's based on also, apparently the book it's based on was one of the inspirations for The Shining. So maybe that makes sense why there's a connection. And I get it. I mean, it's about a... I won't ruin it, actually, because the Netflix series of Haunting of Hill House is really great. I tried to watch The Haunting of Bly Manor. I got 5 episodes in, and it wasn't doing it for me. It wasn't. I should have finished it, really, but it was nowhere near as good. It was nowhere near as scary, and the story just wasn't as interesting. But anyway, yeah, Haunting of Hill House, just the tone and the setting, and just the way he does the scares, and the cinematography, and the idea of there being like 2 time periods. There's this haunting when they were a child, and now this is them as adults. That's exactly the same, and the character, how they made Danny as an adult was incredibly similar to the character of Luke Crane in Haunting of Hill House, how he kind of becomes a drug addict. It's all very, very similar. And there's even some cast members the same. What's his name? Elliot from E.T. I can't remember the actor's name. He is it Henry Thomas? It might be Henry Thomas. Let me have a Google. Yes, Henry Thomas. He's in both of these, and there's one of the little girls is in the opening scene of Doctor Sleep, who is also one of the girls in Haunting of Hill House. And there's also other things that reminded me of. It reminded me of this like genre that's created in recent years of Netflix films. I feel like they all feel the same mood. So Stranger Things, definitely. There's clear parallels with that, and Stranger Things also connected to It. That they're similar sort of. That sort of, it's yes, it's a horror, but it's also kind of an adventure in the same way, and it's and the Goonies, but I mean that's not really horror either. But it's not really strictly a horror. It's more about the mystery and the trying to stop these villains. You're more likely to get out of it knowing they're going to succeed, and it's, I don't know. Also similar as Lock and Key, which is another Netflix series, which I don't think has really got the recognition it deserves. I really enjoyed it. There's only been one season so far, but they've commissioned 2 more. And yeah, it's basically just, it feels like a mixture between Stranger Things, and then there's also the high school stuff of like Sex Education or Riverdale or something, like, and mixed with, there's a bit of Harry Potter in there, there's a bit of Haunting of Hill House, a bit of like, it's just everything on Netflix combined into a kind of a family friendly version. I love it. Anyway, that reminded me of that. Also, there's some Conjuring films things I thought in Doctor Sleep, especially at the start. There's, I won't ruin it too much, but the opening stuff before with time jumps to Danny as an adult. There's just the way they do the horror is so Conjuring. It's so just, it's like a ghost train or like a haunted house at a theme park. It's dark, and then in the shadows there comes something, and it just jump scares and just trashy. I've seen all the Conjuring films, and this reminded me of all of them, really. Not really the Nun, but I mean, I guess pretty much all the others. I thought Annabelle Comes Home probably the most, but then maybe in the haunted house itself, maybe just the first Conjuring. All of them. I heard Mark Kermode on BBC Radio 5 draw a connection between Doctor Sleep and Twilight, and I kind of see that, especially with the villains. I haven't talked about the villains. The villain's terrible. It's just some Irish woman in a hat who's only Irish when Rebecca Ferguson can remember to do the accent. It sounds like every 3 lines she alternates between English, American, and Irish. It's really weird. Even though Rebecca Ferguson's Swedish, it's strange. But yeah, also I thought it was quite X-Men like. The Shining in the original, it feels like some kind of, I don't know, it feels like a dark ability, which it's sad to have it. It feels kind of like in The Conjuring 2, the girl's connection to, and actually all the Conjuring films, it feels like Lorraine Warren's ability, which is, it's more of a burden than anything, but it's something, you have to handle responsibly, and it's like a superpower in a way, of like being able to hear the dead and hear all these and see things and all out of body experiences. But it's not a superpower. It's never treated that way. Whereas this, it felt very X-Men. It felt like it felt like Shazam or something. It felt like it was like a 13-year-old with superpowers. I think that seems like Miss Marvel's going to be like that as well. It also, being a sequel from much later, recreating the same locations, but they're all decadent and old, and it's trying to reclaim the same glory, but it's shot in this super HD digital way, just like the Star Wars sequels or The Mandalorian, some episodes of that, the Jurassic World, Mary Poppins Returns, which I kind of grown at, like the requel they call it, where it's a remake, but it is technically in the same universe. It's the death of cinema of the 21st century, quite frankly, especially the last few years, the 2010s and the 20s. It also reminded me a lot of Ready Player One. There's that shining bit, but whereas that is meant to be set in a video game, so the fact is it's really digital and fake and recreated. That's fine, because they're not trying to recreate The Shining. They're trying to create a video game version of The Shining, so it's fine. Whereas I thought this, in the early scenes, they try and do some scene recreations, and it just felt so fake, and it was just so digital, and it just, everything was so clean and so. It felt like I was watching a movie. It didn't feel like I was watching a believable hotel. Everything, it was just, it's hard to describe. It was awful. And because they recast the actors as well. I kind of wish. See, there's a lot of CGI in this, which I think completely takes you out of it. I think it doesn't work at no CGI in this whole film works. So I think they should have spent that whole budget on recreating the actors with VFX. Because I know I was just saying how much I don't like VFX ruining horror movies, especially because it just feels fake. I also feel at the same time I don't like when they recast actors. Continuity wise and just realism wise, it completely takes me out of it. I'd rather use all that money to deep fake the actors or do CG replicants or something, or some other way of doing it cleverly. I mean, I thought the actors did an alright job. I thought the kid who's meant to be Danny I just felt like I was watching someone acting. I didn't feel like I was watching. I thought that he wasn't very good. I thought Wendy there were some bits where I was I'm not sure. Other bits where I thought she was good. There's a bit where she runs over to him and she's like, "Daddy, Daddy," and I thought that was pretty good. But other bits in the house, I didn't buy. There was some really quick cuts later on in the sort of third act where it recreates the scene on the stairs when Jack's coming up to kill Wendy and she's slashing the knife at him. Apparently 51 times she tries to slash him with a knife. That's quite a lot. But yeah, that scene was so quick that you kind of didn't quite register it wasn't the right actors. So that was completely fine with me. I just thought on the whole I didn't buy it. The guy who played Dick Halloran was good though. I thought he did a good job. Anyway, I don't know where I've lost my train of thought. I've just gone on so many tangents. Basically, it was entertainment. It wasn't art. It was a movie. It wasn't a film. It was The Shining took so many risks. It was every actor, they have to take risks. You have to take every great film ever is because they took a risk. You will never achieve greatness unless you take a risk. Yes, that means it can go horribly wrong. But so The Shining is like, regardless of if it worked or if it didn't, it would have gone down in history as one of the most memorable Jack Nicholson performances and Shelley Duvall performances. This is playing it safe as they can possibly play it, and so I just feel like it can never achieve greatness. It's fine, but like Ewan McGregor, who I really like, it's not one of his like most remembered performances. It never will be. It's not The Shining in any way, but I give it 3 stars. So this has been very rambling as a review and very all over the place. I've not really talked about the actual film itself. It's fine. It's if you've seen The Shining, watch it, but if you don't want to consider it canon, you don't have to. I feel like I like The Shining for all its different interpretations, so I kind of consider they're like, I don't know, like parallel universes where they're all canon. So yes, this is canon and it isn't canon at the same time.